The first thing Lorna Hayes heard was the crack of her father's fist. It slammed down on the old oak table, hard enough to make her teacup jump and her heart hammer against her ribs. It was 1879, and the West Texas plains were baked bone dry by a drought that had killed everything. And her father, William Hayes, had just killed her future. "I found you a husband, girl," he slurred, his voice thick with cheap whiskey. "He's paid good money. You'll be leaving with him tomorrow." Lorna just stared. Her father's face was a roadmap of busted dreams and bad decisions. She was 20 years old, and this failing farm was the only world she'd ever known. Ever since her mother died, all he did was drink and sink deeper into debt. But this? Selling her? Like she was a piece of livestock? "Father, you can't be serious," she whispered. Her voice was shaking. "I don't even know this man." He didn't look at her. He just took another swig from his bottle, his eyes bloodshot and empty. "His name's Bartholomew Tanner. Owns a trading post up north. He's got money, Lorna. More than we'll ever see." He waved a hand around their sparse kitchen. "The drought's taken everything. Everything." He finally met her eyes, and there was nothing left in them. "Tanner's offered a handsome sum. You should be grateful anyone would want you at all." Tears burned in Lorna's eyes. She stood up, her chair scraping against the floorboards. "I am not something to be sold. Mother never would have allowed this." "Your mother isn't here?" he spat, and for a second a flicker of pain crossed his face before it hardened back into something cruel. "And neither will you be? Come tomorrow. Tanner will be here at noon. Pack your things." She didn't sleep that night. She just lay in her small bed, her mind racing, searching for an escape that wasn't there. She had no money, no horse. The nearest town was 15 miles away, too far to run. For the first time in her life, she was completely, utterly alone. Morning came like a death sentence. She put on her best blue calico dress, her hands moving like they belonged to someone else. She packed a small bag, a few clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, a worn copy of Pride and Prejudice, all she had to show for 20 years of life. She was washing the breakfast dishes when she heard them. Horses. Peering through the window, her heart sank. It wasn't just one rider, it was two. The first man was unmistakable. Bartholomew Tanner. He sat on a big black stallion, a mountain of a man with a dark beard shot through with gray. He rode like a man who owned the world and everything in it, but it was the second rider who made her pause. He was tall and lean on a chestnut mare, his face hidden in the shadow of a wide-brimmed hat. He wasn't dressed like Tanner. He wore the simple, practical clothes of a working cowboy. Worn leather, faded denim. Her father stepped out onto the porch, trying to look respectable. Lorna stayed in the kitchen, a prisoner in her own home, watching her future ride up on a cloud of dust. "Tanner," her father called out, his voice full of false cheer. "Right on time. And who's this with you?" The big man swung down from his horse. "This here's Yates McKenzie." Tanner's voice was oily, slick. "Got some business with me. Where's the girl? I'd like to inspect my purchase." The second rider, Yates, went rigid. His hand tightened on his saddle horn. Lorna couldn't see his face, but his whole body screamed disapproval. "Lorna!" her father bellowed. "Come out here!" She took a deep breath and stepped onto the porch. She held her chin high, even though her stomach was churning with fear. Up close, Tanner was even worse. Small, mean eyes and a fleshy face. A suit stretched tight over a big belly. He looked her up and down like she was a horse he was about to buy. "Well, well," he said, a smile revealing tobacco-stained teeth. "You didn't exaggerate, Hayes. A fine-looking woman. Turn around, girl. Let me see all of you." Lorna didn't move. Her hands were clenched into fists at her sides. "I am not a horse at auction, sir." Tanner's smile vanished. "Got spirit, does she? That'll need breaking." He reached into his coat and tossed a pouch to her father. It jingled, an obscene sound in the quiet morning. $50, as agreed. She's mine now." Her father caught the pouch. He wouldn't meet her eyes. He was already counting the coins. The world tilted under Lorna's feet. Sold for $50 to a man who talked about breaking her. She looked at her father, a desperate, silent plea. But he was already pocketing the money. His face was a closed door. "Mr. Hayes." The voice was deep and calm. It cut through the tension like a knife. Yates Mackenzie had dismounted. He stepped forward, taking off his hat. He had sun-bleached brown hair and eyes the color of a summer storm. He was young, maybe 25. His face was weathered, like he'd spent his whole life under an open sky. "I'd like to make a counteroffer," he said. Tanner's head whipped around. "What the hell are you talking about, Mackenzie?" Yates ignored him. His stormy eyes were locked on her father. "I'm offering you my ranch, the Lazy M, north of Copper Creek. 300 acres, good water rights, a decent house. Worth a hell of a lot more than $50. Silence. A heavy, stunned silence fell over the farmyard. Lorna stared at the stranger. Her father's jaw was hanging open. "Have you lost your mind?" Tanner sputtered, his face turning purple. "I'm entirely serious," Yates said, his gaze unwavering. "My deed against your coins. Mr. Hayes can decide which he values more." Her father looked from the pouch of coins to the stranger's face, greed and confusion warring in his eyes. "You'd trade a whole ranch for my daughter?" "Not for your daughter," Yates corrected, his voice firm. "For her freedom. The ranch would be yours. Miss Hayes would be beholden to no one." Lorna felt like she was dreaming. Who was this man? Why would he do this? Tanner stepped forward, his hand dropping toward his gun. "Now see here, Mackenzie, we had a deal." But her father wasn't listening. He was staring at Yates. "This ranch, it's not worthless land? No trick?" "The Lazy M is good land," Yates said. "Working well. Ask anyone in Copper Creek." He reached into his vest and pulled out a folded paper. "Here's the deed. I can sign it over right now." Her father snatched the paper. His eyes went wide as he read it. 300 acres. Water rights. This is real. He looked up at Yates, a strange light in his eyes. Tanner exploded. "This is absurd. I won't be outbid by some saddle tramp." He reached for his gun. Yates was faster. His hand shot out, clamping around Tanner's wrist. The big man winced. "I wouldn't," Yates said, his voice dangerously quiet. Tanner wrenched his arm free, glaring at William. "You made a deal with me, Hayes. A deal's a deal." But her father was just staring at the deed in his hands. He looked at the paper, then at the small pouch of coins. It wasn't even a choice. "Sorry, Tanner," he said, his voice flat. "This is business. I'm taking the better offer." Tanner's face twisted with rage. "You'll regret this," he spat, climbing clumsily onto his horse. "Both of you." He pointed a thick finger at Yates. "And you've made an enemy today." He spurred his horse and galloped away, leaving them in a cloud of dust and hatred. In the ringing silence, Lorna found her voice. She looked at Yates Mackenzie, this impossible stranger. "Why?" she asked. "Why would you do this?" He put his hat back on, his expression unreadable. "No man should buy a woman like a piece of property." He turned to her father. "The deed needs to be witnessed in town, and I'll be taking Miss Hayes with me to Copper Creek. She deserves the protection of the law until she decides her own path." Her father barely heard. He was already lost in his new fortune, clutching the deed like it was the Holy Grail. He disappeared into the house without another word to her. Lorna was left alone with her savior. He wasn't handsome, not in the way you read about in books. His skin was weathered by the sun, and a small scar cut through his left eyebrow. But there was a steadiness to him, a quiet strength. "You don't know me," she said softly. "Why give up your home for me?" He met her gaze, and for the first time, she saw something in those stormy eyes. "Some things are worth more than land, Miss Hayes. You should get your things. We should reach town before nightfall." She retrieved her small bag. Her father was already packing his own belongings, muttering about his new property. He didn't even say goodbye. Outside, Yates helped her onto his mare, then swung up behind her. She'd never been this close to a man before. His chest was a solid wall against her back. He reached around her to take the reins. "Hold on," he said, and they rode away, leaving the only home she'd ever known behind in the dust. They rode in silence for miles. Lorna was hyper-aware of him, of the solid presence of the man who had just bought her freedom at an unbelievable price. Finally, she had to know. "Mr. Mackenzie, I'm grateful, truly, but you've given up everything. Where will you go?" She felt him shrug behind her. Been thinking of moving on anyway. My father's dream, not mine. Been running it alone since he passed. It was time for a change. Lorna twisted to look at him. That still doesn't explain why you'd give it all up for a stranger. He was quiet for a long time. She thought he wouldn't answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and grim. I was in town yesterday. Heard Tanner bragging at the saloon about the bride he'd purchased. Said her father was selling her for $50 because they were destitute. His jaw tightened. The muscle jumped under his skin. I've seen Tanner's kind before. The women at his trading post, they don't last long. A chill went down her spine. What do you mean? He's had 3 wives in the past 5 years, Yates said, and his voice was cold as a grave. Each one younger than the last. None of them are still around. No one can prove anything. But there are rumors. Lorna swallowed hard. The full horror of what she'd escaped washed over her. He hadn't just saved her from a bad marriage. He had saved her life. So you saved me, she breathed. I offered your father a choice, he corrected. He could have refused. They rode over a small hill, and a town appeared in the distance, shimmering in the heat. Copper Creek. What will happen to me now? She asked, the question that had been screaming in her mind. That's for you to decide, he said. You're free. But if you have nowhere to go, Mrs. Sullivan at the boarding house always needs help. She's a good woman. You could stay there. Figure things out. Choices, her own future. The idea was terrifying and exhilarating. For the first time in her life, she wasn't a daughter or a burden or a piece of property. She was just Lorna. They rode into Copper Creek as the sun went down. It was a small, dusty town, a general store, a saloon, a sheriff's office. People stopped and stared as they passed. A strange man riding with a young woman. But Yates didn't seem to notice. He led the horse straight to a 2-story building that read, Sullivan's Boarding House. He helped her down. Her legs were unsteady and she stumbled. He caught her elbow, his touch firm and steady. Their eyes met for a second, and something fluttered in her chest. The door opened, and a plump, middle-aged woman with iron-gray hair stepped out, wiping her hands on an apron. Her eyes took in the whole scene in a single, shrewd glance. Yates Mackenzie, she said, her tone unsurprised. This isn't your usual day for town. Mrs. Sullivan, Yates greeted her, taking off his hat. This is Miss Lorna Hayes. She's in need of lodging and maybe employment. The woman's gaze softened as she looked at Lorna. Of course, we're always short-handed. Come along, dear. You look like you could use a good meal. Lorna turned back to Yates, suddenly not wanting him to go. Will I see you again? Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise or something warmer. I'll be around for a few days, settling business. He put his hat back on. Good evening, Miss Hayes. And then he was gone, riding toward the livery stable. Mrs. Sullivan ushered her inside. The place was clean and smelled of baking bread. It felt safe. I have a small room upstairs, Mrs. Sullivan said. It's not fancy, but it's clean. I don't have much money, Lorna admitted. Yates Mackenzie wouldn't have brought you here if he didn't intend to see you taken care of, the woman said matter-of-factly. But we can talk arrangements tomorrow. The room was small, but it was hers. A narrow bed, a washstand, a window overlooking the street. After the terror of the last 2 days, it felt like a palace. Thank you, Lorna said, sinking onto the bed. She felt overwhelmed. He gave my father his ranch to keep me from being sold to a man named Bartholomew Tanner. Mrs. Sullivan's eyebrows shot up. Did he now? Well, that explains a few things. Tanner's a nasty piece of work. Everyone knows it. She paused, a thoughtful look on her face. And Yates, let's just say he has his reasons for taking a stand against men like that. Before Lorna could ask what she meant, Mrs. Sullivan was gone, promising to bring up supper. Left alone, Lorna unpacked her meager belongings. She ran her fingers over her mother's silver hairbrush. What did you say to a man who had given up his home for a stranger? And why did the thought of seeing him again make her heart beat so fast? She fell asleep dreaming of storm-gray eyes in the endless Texas sky, but her dreams were troubled, because in the back of her mind she knew a man like Tanner didn't just give up. He was out there somewhere, and he wanted what he'd paid for. The next morning, Lorna started her new life. She helped Margaret, Mrs. Sullivan insisted she call her Margaret, with the cooking and cleaning. The work was familiar, but for the first time, it felt like a choice. In the afternoon, the bell on the front door jingled. It was Yates. He stood in the doorway, hat in hand. "Miss Hayes," he said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all," she said, her heart doing that little flutter again. "I was hoping we could speak privately," he said, his expression serious. They sat in the empty common room. "I visited the bank," he started. "The deed transfer is complete. The ranch belongs to your father now." It still seemed impossible. "There's something else," he said, leaning forward. "Tanner was at the saloon last night, making threats. He thinks I cheated him." A knot of fear tightened in her stomach. "He's still in town?" "He left this morning, but he made it clear he wasn't done with either of us." His jaw was hard. "I don't want to frighten you, Miss Hayes, but you need to be cautious. Don't go anywhere alone." "You think he'd try to harm me?" "I think Tanner is a man who gets what he wants, no matter the cost," Yates said, his voice grim. "The sheriff knows, but his hands are tied for now." The thought of Tanner's cruel eyes made her shiver. "What will you do now? Without your ranch?" He shrugged, but it didn't look convincing. "I'll manage. I've been on my own since I was 16. 16. So young. She wanted to ask more, but it felt too soon. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," she said instead. "You don't owe me anything," he said gruffly. "I did what any decent man would do." "We both know that's not true," she said gently. "How many men would give up their home?" He looked away, uncomfortable. Before he could answer, Margaret came in, her arms full of packages. Yates stood, relieved by the interruption. "I should go," he said. "I just wanted to warn you about Tanner." He paused at the door. Perhaps you might join me for supper tomorrow? At the hotel restaurant." Warmth bloomed in her chest. "I would like that very much, Mr. Mackenzie." "Yates," he said, a small smile finally breaking through. "And you must call me Lorna." After he left, Margaret emerged from the kitchen, her eyes twinkling. "Inviting you to supper, is he? That's more socializing than Yates Mackenzie has done in 2 years." Lorna felt herself blush. "It's just a friendly meal." "Of course it is, dear," Margaret said with a knowing smile. The next evening, Lorna stood in front of her small mirror, fussing with her hair. Her blue dress seemed so plain. "You look lovely," Margaret said from the doorway. "Stop worrying." Yates was waiting in the hotel lobby. He was wearing a clean white shirt and a dark vest. He'd shaved. The sight of him made her pulse quicken. "You look beautiful," he said, and the sincerity in his voice made all her worries disappear. Dinner was easier than she expected. He told her about growing up on a ranch, about losing his parents to influenza when he was just 16. "That must have been terribly difficult," she said. "It was," he admitted, "but it taught me to rely on myself." She told him about her own mother's death, about how her father had fallen apart. "That doesn't excuse what he tried to do," Yates said, a hard edge to his voice. "No," she agreed, "it doesn't." The conversation turned to books, and she was surprised to find he was well-read. She mentioned Pride and Prejudice. "I've always loved Elizabeth Bennet's spirit," she said, "her unwillingness to marry without affection." "Is that what you want?" he asked, his gray eyes searching hers. "A man who values your mind and spirit?" The question hung in the air between them. "Yes," she said softly. "When I marry, it will be for love." He held her gaze for a long moment, a worthy aspiration. As they were finishing their meal, a man walked in, tall, well-dressed, with a sheriff's badge pinned to his vest. He walked straight to their table. "Mackenzie," he said, nodding to Yates, then to Lorna. "Miss." "Sheriff Dawson," Yates replied, his body tensing. "Is there a problem?" The sheriff's face was grim. "Just thought you should know. Tanner's back in town. Arrived an hour ago. He's got 2 men with him. They're at the saloon, making threats. Loud ones." The blood drained from Lorna's face. Yates's hand started to move across the table toward hers, then stopped. "I see," he said, his voice tight. "Thank you for the warning." The sheriff nodded. "I've told him I won't tolerate any trouble, but I thought you should be aware." He looked at Lorna. "Miss Hayes, I'd suggest you stay close to the boarding house tonight." After the sheriff left, the easy atmosphere was gone. Yates paid the bill. his eyes constantly scanning the street as they left. The saloon was just a few buildings down, light and rowdy laughter spilling out into the night. Yates put a hand on the small of her back, guiding her away. The touch was protective, and it sent a shiver through her. They were halfway to the boarding house when a voice cut through the darkness. "Mackenzie!" They turned. Bartholomew Tanner stood 20 yards away, swaying. He wasn't alone. Two rough-looking men stood behind him, their hands near their guns. "Keep walking," Yates murmured to Lorna. "Get to the boarding house." "I'm not leaving you," she whispered back. "Well, isn't this touching?" Tanner slurred, stumbling closer. The cattle rancher and his stolen prize. "Go home, Tanner," Yates said, his voice dangerously even. "You're drunk." Tanner laughed, an ugly sound. "I paid good money for her, and I mean to collect what's mine." "I belong to no one," Lorna said, her voice shaking but firm. "Least of all you." Before Tanner could move, two figures stepped out of the shadows. It was Sheriff Dawson and his deputy, both holding rifles. "That's far enough, Tanner," the sheriff said. "I warned you." Tanner's face twisted in rage. For a second, Lorna thought he'd go for his gun anyway. Then he spat on the ground. "This isn't over," he growled, his eyes locked on Yates. "Not by a long shot." Then he and his men stalked back toward the saloon. The confrontation left Lorna trembling. The sheriff insisted she not stay at the boarding house, where Tanner knew she would be. Yates immediately booked 2 rooms at the hotel, across the hall from each other. "It's just for tonight," he assured her as they stood outside her door. "Until we're sure he's gone." "This is about more than just me now, isn't it?" she asked. "It's about his pride." Yates's expression darkened. "It started about you, but now it's about him proving he can't be beaten." He ran a hand through his hair. "I don't regret what I did, Lorna. Not for a second." The way he said her name made her heart skip a beat. "Good night, Yates," she whispered, suddenly afraid of the depth of feeling swirling inside her. "Good night," he replied. "Lock your door." She lay awake for hours, the sound of his voice, the look in his eyes replaying in her mind, and she couldn't shake the feeling that Tanner's threat wasn't just drunken words. It was a promise written in blood. The next morning there was a knock on her door. It wasn't Yates, it was Margaret Sullivan, holding a bundle of clean clothes. "The sheriff told me what happened," she said, bustling into the room. "Dreadful business." She sat on the bed, her expression serious. "Lorna, I'm here to make sure you understand what you're getting into." "Getting into?" "With Yates," Margaret said. "He's a good man, one of the best, but he carries burdens." "We're just friends," Lorna protested, but her cheeks were hot. Margaret gave her a skeptical look. "I've seen how he looks at you, and how you look at him," she sighed. "It's not my story to tell, but let's just say Yates has a very personal reason to despise men who treat women like property. Ask him about his sister sometime." His sister? He'd never mentioned a sister. Lorna found him waiting in the lobby. His face lit up when he saw her. "Any sign of Tanner?" she asked as they stepped outside. "Sheriff says he and his men rode out at dawn," Yates replied. "Headed north." Relief washed over her. "So it's over." Yates hesitated. "For now." They walked back toward the boarding house. The town was coming to life, a picture of peaceful, ordinary life. "What will you do now?" she asked. "I've been offered temporary work at the Rocking W Ranch, just outside town," he said, "breaking horses." So he was staying. The thought made her happier than it should have. They reached the boarding house, and she was about to invite him in for coffee when the front door burst open. One of the guests, a traveling salesman, nearly ran them over. "Fire!" he yelled, pointing down the street. "The livery stable's on fire." They turned. Thick black smoke was pouring into the morning sky. People were already running, forming a bucket brigade. "I have to help," Yates said, already moving. "Stay here where it's safe." But she couldn't. She followed him, joining the line, passing heavy buckets of water hand to hand. The smoke was blinding, choking. Through the haze, she saw men leading terrified, screaming horses out of the burning building. She lost sight of Yates in the chaos. It took an hour to get the fire under control. The stable was a total loss. a skeleton of charred timbers. As the chaos died down, a cold fear gripped her. "Has anyone seen Yates?" she asked, her voice tight with panic. No one had. She searched frantically, calling his name. She found him behind the general store, sitting on an overturned barrel. His face was black with soot, and he was pressing a bloodied rag to his forehead. "Yates!" she cried, rushing to his side. "Are you hurt?" He looked up, and relief washed over his face when he saw her. "I'm all right. A beam fell. Just a glancing blow." He pulled the rag away, revealing a nasty gash over his eye. Without thinking, she took the rag and began to gently clean the wound. "You need a doctor," she insisted. He didn't pull away. He just watched her, his storm gray eyes intense. "You could have been killed," she whispered. "But I wasn't," he said softly. "I'm right here." The world seemed to shrink to just the two of them. For a heartbeat, she thought he was going to kiss her. Then Sheriff Dawson was there, his face grim. "Mackenzie, need to talk to you." He was holding a piece of cloth, a bandana with a distinctive red pattern. "Recognize this?" Yates's expression hardened into stone. "It's Tanner's. I saw him wearing it yesterday." "That's what I thought," the sheriff said. "This wasn't an accident, Mackenzie. Someone doused the back wall with kerosene. We're lucky no one was killed." Lorna gasped. "You think Tanner set the fire?" "He wanted us to think he'd left town," the sheriff said. Then he circled back. "It's a warning," Yates said, his voice shaking with fury. "He knew my horse was stabled there. He knew I'd try to save it." The implication was horrifying. Tanner hadn't just tried to hurt Yates. He had been willing to burn down half the town, to kill innocent people, just to send a message. "I'm going after him," Sheriff Dawson declared. "This is arson, endangerment. I can arrest him now." "I'm coming with you," Yates said, trying to stand. "No," the sheriff said, his tone final. "This is my job, not yours. Besides, someone needs to stay here and protect Miss Hayes. Tanner might come back." Yates finally reluctantly agreed. The doctor stitched up the cut on his forehead. As they walked back to the boarding house, the smell of smoke hung heavy in the air, a constant reminder of how close they had all come to disaster. That evening, Lorna sat on the porch watching the sunset. She couldn't stop thinking about Margaret's words. Ask him about his sister. As if summoned by her thoughts, he appeared at the end of the street, walking toward her. He sat in the chair beside her, and for a while they just watched the sky turn from orange to purple. "Margaret mentioned you had a sister," she said finally, her voice quiet. He went very still. When he finally spoke, his voice was hollow. "Her name was Hannah. She was younger than me. After our parents died, I left her with our aunt and uncle to go find work. I was going to save up, get us a home." He was turning his hat over and over in his hands. "I came back 6 months later. She was gone. Married," my aunt said, "to a wealthy trader who'd passed through town, twice her age." His knuckles were white. "I knew something was wrong. Hannah wanted to be a teacher, like our mother. She wouldn't have just run off and married a stranger." A cold dread settled in Lorna's stomach. "Your uncle sold her?" Yates nodded, his face a mask of old pain. "For $200. I didn't find out the truth until later, after I tracked them to New Mexico." "You found her?" she whispered, afraid of the answer. "I found her grave," he said, his voice breaking. "She died 3 months after the wedding. Her husband claimed it was a fever. But the local doctor, he told me she had bruises, broken bones, said she'd tried to run away, twice." Tears streamed down Lorna's face. She reached out and covered his hand with hers. "Oh, Yates, I'm so sorry." "I wanted to kill him," he confessed, his hand gripping hers tightly. "I had my gun drawn, but I couldn't." He finally looked at her, his storm gray eyes filled with a grief so profound it stole her breath. "So when I heard Tanner bragging, when I heard about you, I couldn't let it happen again." "So you gave up everything," she whispered. "Not everything," he said softly, his gaze holding hers. "I gained something too." The air between them was electric. She knew in that moment that this was more than gratitude, more than friendship. Before she could speak, the sound of hoofbeats shattered the evening quiet. A lone rider was galloping into town, heading for the sheriff's office. It was a ranch hand. "Something's wrong," Yates said, standing up. They ran toward the office just as the rider threw himself from his horse. "Mackenzie!" The man gasped, relieved to see him. "It's Tanner! He and his men. They attacked the rocking W, drove off half the cattle, burned a line shack." He took a ragged breath. "Old man Wilson, the owner. He's been shot." "Is he alive?" Yates demanded. "Barely. The doctor's with him now." The ranch hand wiped sweat from his face. "Tanner's holed up there. He's waiting for you, Mackenzie. He's using the ranch as bait." Yates's face was a thundercloud. He turned to Lorna, a terrible conflict in his eyes. "I have to go." "I know," she said, her heart pounding with fear. "But you can't face him alone. It's a trap." "There are a dozen ranch hands there," he said. "We'll handle it." "Let me come with you," she pleaded. "I can help with Mr. Wilson." "It's too dangerous," he argued. "If he got his hands on you—" "He won't," she said firmly. "But I can't stay here, not knowing. I can't." He looked into her eyes and finally he gave a short, sharp nod. "You stay at the main house. Promise me." "I promise." They rode hard under a full moon. The atmosphere at the rocking W was thick with tension. Men with rifles stood guard at every window. Upstairs, the owner, an old man named Wilson, lay in bed, his face ashen. The doctor just shook his head. "Yates!" the old man rasped. "You came!" He fought for every breath. "Tanner came looking for you. When I said you weren't here, he shot me, said it was a message." Wilson's eyes found Lorna. "Pretty friend," he managed to whisper. He looked back at Yates, his expression deadly serious. "Listen, boy, my will. Everything goes to my nephew in St. Louis, but he's a city man. Won't want this place." He coughed, a terrible wet sound. "I told my foreman, if anything happens, you're to run this ranch." Yates was stunned. "Sir, No arguments," Wilson insisted, his voice fading. "Now go deal with Tanner." In the hallway, the doctor's words were blunt. "He's dying. The bullet pierced his lung. He has hours, maybe less." When Yates came back into the room, his face was set like granite. "I'm going after Tanner," he said quietly. "This ends tonight." "Yates, please," she begged. "Wait for the sheriff." "The sheriff could be days away. Tanner is killing innocent people to get to me. I won't let anyone else die." She saw the look in his eyes. Nothing could stop him. "Then come back to me," she whispered, her hand on his cheek. "Promise me." He caught her hand, pressing it to his lips. "I promise." Then he leaned in and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It was fierce, desperate, full of fear and promise. And then he was gone. Hours crawled by. Old man Wilson drifted in and out of consciousness. Just after midnight, the night exploded with gunfire. Lorna rushed to the window. In the distance, flashes of light like deadly fireflies. The sound of shouting, then more gunshots. Then an awful, ringing silence. She waited. Every minute was an agony. Was he alive? Was he dead? As the first light of dawn broke, she heard horses. She ran downstairs praying it was Yates. It was Sheriff Dawson and his men. Her heart sank. "Where's Mackenzie?" the sheriff asked, his face weary. "He went after Tanner last night," she said, her voice trembling. "There was gunfire." Before she could finish, a ranch hand came running from the north pasture. "Sheriff, you'd better come quick. We found them." Lorna didn't wait. She ran, her skirts flying, her heart pounding in her throat. They crested a small hill. A group of men were gathered in a circle. As she got closer, they parted. Two bodies lay on the ground. "No," she whispered, stumbling forward. "No, no, no." She fell to her knees beside the first figure. It was Yates. Bloodied, bruised, but his eyes flickered open. He was alive. A few feet away lay Bartholomew Tanner, a bullet hole in his chest, his dead eyes staring up at the morning sky. "Lorna," Yates croaked, reaching for her. "You're supposed to be at the house." Relief washed over her, so powerful it made her dizzy. Tears streamed down her face. "And you're supposed to be in one piece," she choked out. The sheriff confirmed it was self-defense. Yates had been faster. Justice, at last. But the cost had been high. 3 ranch hands had also died in the fight. And when they got back to the house, they learned that old man Wilson was gone. The next few days were a blur of burials and legalities. A telegram was sent to Wilson's nephew in St. Louis. Yates and Lorna stayed at the ranch, a strange, quiet understanding growing between them in the midst of the grief. A week later, the nephew arrived. Edward Wilson was a city man, dressed in an expensive suit, and he made it clear he wanted nothing to do with a dusty Texas ranch. "I have investments in railroads, Mr. Mackenzie," he said dismissively. "That's the future, not cowboys." He eyed Yates. "My uncle's telegram mentioned you might be interested in purchasing the property." "I might be," Yates said cautiously. Edward named a price. It was fair, but it was far more than Yates had. The dream of the rocking W of a future seemed to die right there. That evening, they sat on the porch as the sun went down. "He wants more than I can afford," Yates said, his voice flat with disappointment. He took her hand. "It's not just the ranch, Lorna. It's what it represents. A home, a future." He took a deep breath, his storm gray eyes boring into hers. "A place for us, perhaps, if that's something you might want. I know this happened fast, but I love you, Lorna Hayes." Tears welled in her eyes. Her smile was blinding. "I love you too, Yates Mackenzie," she whispered. "And yes, I could see building a life with you. Anywhere." He pulled her into his arms and kissed her, a kiss full of tenderness and relief. "We'll figure something out," he promised, his forehead resting against hers. "Maybe not the rocking W, but somewhere." They had love, but their future was a blank, empty page. And then the next morning, just as all hope seemed lost, a dusty buggy pulled up to the house. Lorna froze. The man climbing down was her father. He looked older, tired. The arrogance was gone, replaced by a deep, weary shame. "Lorna," he said, his voice rough, "I've been looking for you." Yates appeared in the doorway behind her, his posture rigid. "I came to apologize," her father said, looking from Lorna to Yates. "What I did, it was unforgivable. I see that now." He took a shaky breath. "I sobered up, for the first time since your mother died, and I couldn't stay on that ranch. Knowing how I got it, it felt tainted." He reached into his coat. He wasn't pulling out a weapon. He was pulling out a folded piece of paper, the deed to the Lazy M. "I'm signing it back," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "To Mr. Mackenzie, I can't undo what I did, but I can return what was never mine." Lorna stared, speechless. Yates stepped forward, taking the deed, a look of disbelief on his face. "What will you do now?" Yates asked him. "Got a job with the railroad," he said. "Honest work. I'm trying to make amends." Lorna looked at the man who had almost destroyed her, and for the first time in a long time, she saw a glimmer of the father she remembered. "I forgive you, Papa," she said softly. Tears filled his eyes. He embraced her, a quick, clumsy hug, then nodded to Yates and climbed back into his buggy. They watched him drive away until he was just a speck on the horizon. Yates looked from the deed in his hand to Lorna, a slow smile spreading across his face. "This changes things," he said. "How?" He pulled her close. "It means we have options. The Lazy M isn't the rocking W, but it's an asset." His eyes twinkled. "What if we used it as collateral? For a loan? Enough to make a down payment on this place?" 3 months later, on a crisp October morning, Lorna Hayes became Lorna Mackenzie. The entire town of Copper Creek came to the celebration at Margaret's boarding house. They danced under lanterns on the porch, the new owners of the Mackenzie Ranch. "What are you thinking about, Mrs. Mackenzie?" Yates murmured, pulling her close. "Just how fortunate I am," she replied, resting her head on his chest. "A few months ago, I had nothing. Now, I have everything." He kissed her forehead. "Well, I traded a ranch for the most amazing woman I've ever known. Seems like I came out ahead." She laughed and kissed him, right there in front of everyone. Their life wasn't given to them. It was forged. In a father's desperate sin, a stranger's impossible sacrifice, and a villain's burning rage. It was earned through fire and blood, and a love that was stronger than both. As they rode home to their ranch, under a brilliant canopy of stars, Lorna knew, with absolute certainty, that some things truly were worth more than land or gold. What do you think was the biggest turning point in their story? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this story of justice in the Old West, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button because you won't want to miss the stories we have coming up next.